Hello, welcome to Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast about people making society and the economy more sustainable and environmentally responsible. You know, markets, we talk about them all the time, and boy, are they crashing right now. But markets are characterized by competition over exclusive control of resources. But as our guest today, Frank Dalene, who writes in his new book, Decarbonizing the World, points out, quote, here's the problem. We all are part of the same planet. We all live in the same closed environment. We all have the same atmosphere. We all breathe the same air. Markets aren't necessarily attuned to understanding that shared resource. Frank joins us today to discuss how business and regulators need to rethink their approach to markets in order to reverse global warming. He's the president and CEO of Telemark Inc., a construction business that pioneered green building practices and helped introduce New York State's green building standard. He developed the International Carbon Equivalent Mechanism Attributed to Neutrality, or the acronym ICEMAN. So we're going to refer to ICEMAN during this conversation. International Carbon Equivalent Mechanism Attributed to Neutrality is what that means. That methodology is used to describe the carbon impact of products, buildings. Eventually, the ICEMAN system will provide a carbon factor index score that can be placed on products and services to make it easier for everyone to make informed, sustainable choices about what they consume and the emissions associated with them. Carbon and environmental transparency is an intriguing idea, one we've talked about many times on the show. So let's see how ICEMAN might be the magic bullet so often promised, but so far not delivered. You can learn more about Frank at frankdalene.com. That's FRANKDALENE.com. No spaces, just one word. Frank, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, pleasure to have you here. So first off, I want to ask a question that we hear anytime we write about market-based solutions, which is, but markets are the problem. The argument is that markets have contributed to the climate crisis, so how could they possibly be the right mechanism for responding to the climate crisis? And they don't necessarily factor in non-financial issues like human happiness or social equity that many, including the United Nations, argue need to be factored into a response to global warming. Why are markets the right way to go about this?
Well, you are correct that the markets are causing the problem, right? They're emitting most of the emissions. So that's where we have to go to reduce those emissions. And if we can find a mechanism that will, number one, be accepted by manufacturers, they would embrace it. It would also they would have a financial benefit from implementing those things to help reduce their carbon footprint. Then we might have the magic bullet, as you say.
Well, tell us how ICEMAN works in summary. I know it's a very complex idea. You wrote a book about the whole idea, but can you summarize it for us?
Yeah, you summarize it really, really well, actually. And it's really, to me, it's a simple idea. It's very simple about just measuring the carbon footprint of a manufactured product and the manufacturer itself, go down all the supply chain to where the natural resource comes out of the ground, add all of that up, right? And then convert it mathematically into an indexing system that can be placed on packaging. That indexing system, and the reason I did that was so it would make it very simple for the consumer to understand. You know, an index of 1 to 100, 100 being the best, 1 being the worst. And that's why it's based on a percentage of being carbon neutral, because we can't get our brain wrapped around how much a metric ton of CO2 is. And if we can't visualize it, and I'm very visual, right? So if we can't really understand it, then how are we going to communicate that to the consumer? So if we can make it very simple, and then the consumer can make the choice to purchase a product based on its carbon footprint. It's like all the labels that we have on products today, right? Everything from ingredients to nutritional value to whether it's organic or not, so we see this, and then if we can use that, and then it would impact market forces to put that pressure on the corporations to reduce their carbon footprint, then I think we're accomplishing something.
So consumers could use this, or businesses when making decisions, to send a signal back into the economy to say, I don't want the carbon, thank you.
Yeah, and something about, and you're right about businesses, because in a business, a manufacturer, there's a buyer there buying natural resources or components to make this product that they're making. So their product that they're producing is really a pro rate of sum of the parts of what they're using. So the buyer will also be looking at what that carbon footprint is, because if they purchase materials with a lower carbon footprint, then their product will have a lower carbon footprint. So that's how it works.
Now, one of the things that consistently comes up when we talk about being green in business is there's this notion of a green premium. It costs more to be green. But if you look at the performance over time, especially if you factor in the damage associated with the emissions that we're talking about, it's actually cheaper in the long run to be green. You've been running a business, a construction business, for decades that is oriented around being sustainable. Tell us how business should be thinking about embracing environmental responsibility as a part of their competitive positioning within the market.
So we started, 43 years ago in 1978, before we even called it green, right? So making a home energy efficient was associated with quality. So our purpose was to build the highest quality product that we can. And so that incorporated all of these principles that we were putting into homes, of making them energy efficient, making them tight, looking at the building envelope, right? And cutting down air infiltration. And that also became a necessity when we were building houses on the ocean, because these houses are exposed to heavy wind and rain, where there's a pressure differential between the inside and outside, and wants to equalize, and it brings water into the building. And in a wood frame building, that's not good, right? So there was procedures and means and methods of construction that we were implementing to help with that air infiltration, which also had a secondary impact of causing greater energy efficiency. So and then we started, as technologies were emerging, in having more energy efficient heating systems. We were one of the first early adopters of all of these things, and I attribute it to my Scandinavian roots, right? So we have the culture I grew up with. We had a respect for the environment. And, Norwegians love to go out, love to go hiking. They love to go out into the environment. And there's a sense of having good stewardship to that environment. So that was ingrained in me from early age. And that's why we got involved in these things. And it did establish a niche for us in our market of not only quality, but also as energy sustainability and all of that started becoming more popular, then people started looking at us as being one of the experts in green building. And that's when we founded the Hamptons Green Alliance, which is a not-for-profit organization of people in the trades that make a commitment to building, energy efficient homes.
Now, you just mentioned nonprofit status. Does ICEMAN operate as a for-profit business as you envision it, or is it a nonprofit that might, for instance, allow the information to be collectively owned? Who regulates the information, and is it a benefit for there to be a profit entity behind that?
Yes, that's a great question, actually. And I broke it up into two parts, because I knew I started meeting with legislators, people in government, because this is such a huge, will have such a huge impact, because it involves all manufactured products in the world. So, following what happened with the organic label and how government started in a grassroots level, and then government had to step in to standardize it. Right. So I knew this would have to have government involvement from the beginning. So I started meeting with these legislators, and they got me meetings with the Department of Energy, the EPA, and with meeting with the EPA, they explained to me that they have a process to form a public-private partnership with a for-profit company like me to make this happen. And so we broke that up into really two groups. One is the collecting of the carbon data, carbon emissions, which is something the EPA is very interested in. And it's already, and most people don't know, but the larger corporations, do have to report their carbon emissions. And they do anyway, because they're involved in global, global economy. So Europe, you have cap and trade there, and they have to report their carbon footprint there. So they're accustomed to that. The smaller companies, they explained to me, it's on a voluntary basis, but they do want to collect this data. So what we talked about was their part of
Right.
of collecting that the carbon emissions data, which then they would put into a database that I can have access to. And then with that data, then I can convert that to an index. And then that would be under my control. And then I will put that index on a database where manufacturers and consumers can go and look at it. And it creates a network hub, much like
Right.
Google, or Facebook. And then what the business model that I thought about is just cross-marketing. People from like manufacturers are looking for, let's say looking for cement, for example, or aluminum. They would have to go and find out on a website to find out what the index number, because the carbon emissions will vary drastically between what kind of process is being used, what kind of energy is being used, and then they can decide, the manufacturer can decide if they're going to buy that aluminum from a certain product based on that carbon index number. So, but then if there's suppliers there that supply aluminum that have a lower carbon footprint, they can market that at that point when somebody wants to pull the trigger to purchase something, which I think is very powerful.
So there could be a label,
Yeah.
or an app that tells you about this. And your stake in this is, as a profit entity, is if it isn't a good number, if it is proven not to be effective or accurate, then you lose credibility and you go out of business. And therefore, there is accountability. So that's the argument that a market-based approach rather than a government-managed approach would be the right way to go.
Yeah, and as you know, and as we've seen actually with COVID, and the US and a lot of the free markets, they don't like mandates, right? So
No, they don't.
It's kind of nature, our human nature. We rebel against that, right? So, that's why I believe the capitalistic free markets economy that we have in America is so great, because it allows it to flourish, these ideas to flourish, but it also punishes them that are not successful and are not doing a good job. So there is these what we call market forces, actually, that will make a business go towards a certain direction, whether it's price, whether it's quality. This one being the carbon footprint, right? That being a metric actually by which they would purchase a product. So then I believe the business model is much like Facebook, it's much like Google, and where people can advertise, people can cross market and find raw materials at a lower carbon footprint besides just price.
Yeah, I think this is a great foundation. I understand now where we're going. Let's take a moment. We need to pay a few bills with some advertising. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
We're back and talking with Decarbonize the World author Frank Dalene about using carbon data to make markets that lead to reduced and ultimately no carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So let me ask you about the composition of the index, the carbon index score. It currently focuses, as I read the book, on direct and immediately indirect energy-related emissions, or scope 1 and 2 emissions. Does it need to be extended to cover scope 3 emissions, or by simply aggregating all of the scope 1 and 2 emissions in the economy, can we extrapolate what scope 3 is?
What I say in the book is that we should start with scope 1 and 2. And the reason I said that was because I did follow the World Resources Institute as the greenhouse gas protocol was being developed. And they themselves started with scope 1 and scope 2. And then they began defining scope 3. And then they kept in scope 3, they kept expanding that definition of what's included to upstream, downstream.
Right.
I want to keep it in life cycle analysis you call cradle to gate, right? So when it leaves the manufacturer, not including the downstream scope 3 that the greenhouse gas protocol discusses, is about what happens after that that useful life of that product.
So how do you then come to a number that would be the percentage of carbon neutral if you aren't looking at scope 3?
So we will be looking at scope 3. We will be doing it for the upstream part of it eventually. Mm-hmm. I think to implement it, we have to start with 1 and 2, and then in a year or two, as people are getting accustomed to this, then bring in scope 3, right? So it doesn't become, too much of a heavy lift, for people to understand. And once we have that data, right, then what we do is we create a baseline, which is our 0 in our index. And the baseline is the worst case scenario of making that product. So for example, we here on Long Island, we have our electric grid is mixed between oil, natural gas, and some renewable energy from Niagara, for example. So we have a mixture of different productions of electricity, which gives our grid a carbon footprint, right? Which you can look up at the EPA and see what that is. So, for example, if it's in our grid, we know what that carbon footprint is per kilowatt hour. But let's say if we were on a grid that was all coal, for example, and that was producing electricity, that would be worst case scenario. So that would be
a 1 on your scale.
It would be it would establish the 0, right? So anything, and even in process of manufacturing certain materials for cement, for aluminum, the process itself releases greenhouse gases. So there are different processes that will not emit as much carbon footprint. So that the one that missed the most in a process, that would be also establishing that 0 basis for where the index starts. The 100 is, we all desire to be carbon neutral. So that 100 is 100% carbon neutral. And then if we only achieve about half of it, then the index would be 50. So
how would you factor in carbon positive? Would that be a score higher than 100?
Yeah. And I did address that too. So, you can score, theoretically, you can score 150, right? So there's credits that you get, carbon credits you get for recycling, for example, and repurposing certain things. And so that would give you a carbon credit, or you may have within your manufacturing process ways of taking carbon emissions out of the atmosphere, which you would be given a credit for, just like you would if it was a carbon offset and you were selling carbon offsets. So instead of selling it, right, you can take that carbon credit and give yourself even a greater competitive advantage than somebody who's 100% carbon neutral.
As I read the book, I wondered if you had read Kim Stanley Robinson's recent book, The Ministry for the Future, and they have the idea of a carbon coin backed by the world's central banks that gives you value paid out over 100 years for the carbon credit the carbon that you sequester. Can ICEMAN be combined with an incentive system so that you could enable a carbon market through picking the score, and even somebody purchasing a product which was low carbon getting credit for doing so?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. ICEMAN is very simple. It's the application of climate science, actually. So it's taken the greenhouse gas protocol and applying it to manufacturing. So if it makes more sense to turn it into a coin instead of an index, if that makes sense, I'm in favor of that, of combining it. What I'm trying to do is make it as simple as we can to have the consumer participate it, make it as simple as we can for the consumer to understand. I don't know how much the consumer would understand turning this into a coin. That would be something that I think is a little bit more sophisticated, maybe could be used on a manufacturing level, for example.
Sure. Well, companies could be collecting these coins as well. As part of the transaction, you sold something that was going to reduce the emissions in total, and therefore you've got compensation. But you just raised an important point, which is, what is the role of consumer education in enabling a market mechanism like this? How does the consumer find out? What do you envision? Is it a label? Is it an app? Is it something else?
Yeah, it starts with a label. It would be an app, and the idea is that the consumer, right, moves markets. It's like, in our country, it's about we the people, right? We the people can make change, and I've made tremendous amount of change myself personally. In our local governments, being involved even up to the federal government level. I served on a business advisory council, on the federal level. So we can as people, once you understand that, we can make a change, that people can get involved, right? So the consumer, I believe, is a key part of this to make that change, because they're the ones making that decision to purchase that product. And that's what the manufacturers are looking at, right? So manufacturers are driven by profit. They have to sell their product, and whatever they can do. And we're seeing it today as far as corporate image is concerned, right? Mm-hmm. Corporate image becomes very important to corporations. And we're seeing them today voluntarily making commitments to go carbon neutral, for example. Even some of the oil companies are.
Well, so, whether they're serious or not is another good question.
Well, the thing I'm seeing that's worried, that really is concerning me, is there's no standard, right? I'm bringing that standard to the table, and I'm seeing. I was on an interview, and I was asked the question. There's a developer who built, a 1 million+ square foot building, and he's claiming to be carbon neutral by just purchasing RECs and carbon offsets. I go, well, that goes contrary to the principle of, carbon reduction, because it's about mitigation or reduction first. What you can't reduce, then you offset. It's not what you don't want to reduce. It's what you can't reduce. And I made that distinction, right?
Yeah.
And we have to really work on reducing what that carbon footprint is first, and then purchasing the offset.
So this strikes me as a bit of a chicken and egg problem, in the sense that in order to have the data to establish the standard, first you have to generate the data, and you need some basis for that calculation. You're proposing that with ICEMAN. What did you learn from your engagement in the green building standards, the evolution of green building standards, that suggests how we would bring something like ICEMAN to market?
Well, I use the example actually of the U.S. Green Building Council and how they implemented the LEED certification system. So LEED is leadership in energy and environmental design, is what LEED means. And then they developed for commercial buildings, and they developed LEED for homes. So that all came from the grassroots level, right? And they developed an index. And my only criticism with that is not based on science, and they don't like when I say that, but it kind of, to me, is subjective and arbitrary that they're selecting 2 points for this, 3 points for that, and that's why I worked on ICEMAN and developing something that's objective, right? It's mathematical, objective. It's taking the subjective portion away from it, because that was one of the criticisms with the US GBC as they were implementing this. But the founders, they hoped that what they were bringing forward would be codified, right, and be put into our energy codes. And that began happening. It's right now in New York, we are at a Energy Star standard for homes. And then locally, we passed laws because it required a HERS rating, which is the energy rating system for buildings, and home energy rating system was HERS. So what we did is, what we created here locally was called a stretch code, and that's increasing that energy efficiency in the HERS rating for the larger homes, not the affordable homes, because we know sometimes that has a cost associated, at least an upfront cost. So that stretch code then tightens it up even more. So we've seen how a lot of these initiatives start from the grassroots level, eventually gets integrated into our systems.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the EPA might possibly be the host of a lot of this data and could extrapolate it from the grid data that they're already tracking. What did you also talked about this in the book. What did you learn from the emergence of organic food standards and how those could catalyze sustainable products and services?
Well, it really helped me understand it really is the consumer that's making the change, right? So,
Yeah.
And the consumer, and it's starting from the grassroots level, the consumer being, really concerned about having healthier food. So it started at very similar to a USGBC, but on the organics food level, developing a standard or developing a system by which to certify that. And it got so big that the government stepped in to standardize it and to approve what that standard is. So that we saw, and that I saw, and that's why I tried to emulate that to as much as I could.
It makes sense, and so as you again envision the evolution of ICEMAN, what are the critical first steps? What do you have to do to get the movement started?
Well, I understand that government has to get involved, right? So, and it depends on really the administration. That's why I think today is really the best time to do it. And I've been meeting with legislators, but they didn't seem to have the political capital. So to be able to implement or to be able to first implement, the EPA has to get involved, right? So they would be the one creating the stand, collecting the data, but that has to be done by a legislative act to fund the EPA and also to allocate personnel to work on this. So that's where I was, right? But the political capital didn't seem to be there. Now I'm hoping there is in this administration. It looks so much better. And the environment is so much greater. So that's why I wrote this book, actually, so we can get into legislators' hands and they can understand that it's not such a complicated issue. Yeah, it's a huge issue, but it's really simple concept. And if we can implement this, then I really believe we can really make a change really quickly, by the way.
Well, let's talk more about how the market can be moved by this in just a moment. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our conversation with Frank Dalene, author of Decarbonize the World and CEO of Telemark Inc., a green construction company. So ICEMAN is a carbon-centric approach to measuring environmental impact, but there are a lot of other factors that we might want to consider, particularly as consumers, like water impact, biodiversity impact, or social equity issues when we make a decision. Do you imagine ICEMAN being extended, or could it be extended without breaking it to integrate that kind of information?
What I thought about was by watching climate change develop from Kyoto, which was COP3, to now COP26 in Glasgow, which was held in November, that there has been, and actually they were very concerned at Glasgow about it being a failure, right? Because nations are not coming to the table to make substantial changes, right? At the pace that we really need to, we first started trying to avoid a 1 degree temperature increase. Then it was 1.5 degrees. And now they're admitting they can't achieve that now and might have to be 2 degrees, right? And in 2 degrees, it starts becoming catastrophic. And also the possibility of getting into feedback loops, with the carbon coming out of the permafrost and all of that stuff. I talk about that in the book. So one of the things I was doing, observing this and also attending some conferences myself, was that the UN is linking other issues like social equity to carbon, and they're doing it with great. They're reasoning it really well, right? But it's making it a heavy lift, and that's where I see some of the issues come up. For example, the biggest example was Kyoto was defeated in the U.S. unanimously, both in the House and the Senate.
Yeah, your section in the book about that was very useful in terms of thinking about how to position potential policies, because it just didn't work to say, let's all do cap and trade.
Yeah, because we have different economic systems, in the world, right? So, and then putting in these other social issues or other even polluting issues, the way I look at it, they're all separate issues and they have separate solutions. So we have to come to the point where we say climate change is at such a crisis, where it's at such an emergency situation that we really need to prioritize this, and we need to focus all our attentions on it. If we can later on start to incorporate all the other pollutive things, which I think the market will eventually take care of, just like we're seeing with batteries now, right? So, when you're talking about, or people start criticizing EVs, right? The first thing they go to is the batteries and the pollution that it takes to harvest, lithium from our natural resources and everything like that. And we all agree on that. We're not disagreeing on it. But do we need to really muddy the waters and not buy an EV because of that, right? So now you see battery manufacturers starting to use different chemistry in making batteries. They're going from even lithium ion to a solid state battery. They're actually, in doing this, it's to make batteries, retain more energy and also for a longer period of time. So, there's things in the market that's moving this besides pollution, right?
I hear what you're saying, and I think you're right that if carbon is the crisis, that we need to focus on it. But there is a strong case to be made for the fact that we live in a complex, interrelated system where water impacts or biodiversity impacts will also lead to catastrophic changes.
Yes.
Do you then think that means that there's an ICEMAN score and a water score and a biodiversity score that we need, or again, could we potentially wrap it into some sort of meta-analysis with a single number again?
You know what? I can point right to our area here in the Hamptons, because we are being impacted by this right now, and we just from sea level rise alone, we're surrounded by water. We're a little peninsula sticking out into the ocean, right? So we have a single source aquifer for our fresh water. And we're starting to get, we have for years now been getting saltwater intrusion into our fresh water. So it's at the point now that, the hamlet of Wainscott, which is on the western side of East Hampton, is shipping water from its aquifer, it's sole source because more center of the aquifer, shipping it and piping it to Montauk, which is all the way out on the east end, because Montauk's wells are getting saltwater intrusion on it.
Right.
And they don't have enough fresh water to service their population. So, and then we see also we have issues with nitrogen in our water. So we're having red tides, we're having kill-offs of fish, and there's been studies in our surface waters, which Stony Brook University has been, Dr. Gobler actually being one of the top scientists in trying to solve this problem, has identified where that nitrogen is coming from. And a lot of it is coming from human waste. So we have implemented now, in our codes where we have to have advanced wastewater treatment for any new home or major renovation, which is over 50%. So these are issues which, some of it being caused by climate change, like saltwater intrusion and rising sea levels. And then some of it being caused by just our human impact, right? Our impact in the area and our density, in the area. So those are complicated issues. Yes, water is like one of the greatest natural resources we have to preserve, right? We can't live without water. So that is very important. But, and we can connect it to climate change in finding a solution to climate change, so we don't have the kind of sea level rise that people are projecting, actually, which would be catastrophic to our area too.
You will be underwater if we do not prevent this.
A lot of us,
So, earlier we were talking about corporate commitments. One of the things that we've talked about on our show as well many times is the fact that there's a huge gap between the expressed interest in climate solutions by investors and actual spending on climate solutions. Do you see using a system like ICEMAN to clearly articulate the impacts as a way to catalyze investors moving into green opportunities?
Absolutely. And I believe it justifies it, actually. So I'll give you an example, which is almost become a no-brainer, right? And it should be, actually, and that's putting solar panels on either the commercial buildings or, on our homes. So here on our grid, we're 22 cents a kilowatt hour for our electricity here. So the initial cost of installing solar panels is paid back in electrical savings, energy savings over the first 7-year period of time. Now, solar panels, their lifespan is 30 to 40 years. Yeah, it starts degrading over time, but 30 to 40 years, that means you have 23 to 33 years free electricity. And that's where I get this concept of increasing profits in a business. So if a business can understand, and they do this, by the way, they put in automation to increase efficiency. Why? Because they make more products within a certain amount of time, and it increases their profits. So if they can understand that by implementing renewable energy or energy efficiency into their processes, then that will have a positive impact on them, and that would increase any kind of energy savings, any kind of renewable energy will increase their products and give them a competitive advantage. So, it really hits on everything, I believe, to incentivize corporation, because you and I know they're motivated by profits. So, let's face it, they have to, they serve their shareholders, right? So I think it all makes sense. And I don't really have too many people really criticizing the basic concept, because it does make sense for the business world.
So the book is an argument for ICEMAN, but could I ask you, as we close out the conversation, to imagine what the world would be like and what ICEMAN in particular would be doing in 2040 if you're successful? And would we be close to carbon neutral? Would we be on our way down the carbon scale?
2040 is a long time away.
It is.
I'm hoping we get there much faster than that, right? So, and then I understand that, things don't move as fast as we really want them to. And that's what we're facing today, with the goals that.
How fast could we get there? How fast?
It's not like throwing a switch and we all have, renewable energy. We can't do that. There's a process, right? But I think what I see a bit in market forces, I see market forces being brutal, right? So I looked at 2008 and saw the way our biggest companies who were too big to fail, right, because of everything that was going on with the economic collapse and everything involved in it. And our biggest banking institutions, if they weren't infused by capital by our government, which was kind of a unique situation. Our government really hadn't done that before, right? Get involved in that. We would usually let those market forces, like nature, right? Survival of the fittest, let those companies fall. But they were huge, and probably would have had a greater negative impact on the economic collapse and trying to recover from that. So that I believe proved out to be really the best solution in infusing the capital in these corporations. But those market forces are incredibly powerful. And if we can harness them to do something good at that same level, then I think we could do it very quickly.
One of the concerns, again, and going back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, that we hear frequently from our listeners and readers is that the kinds of intervention you just described in 2008 distort the market entirely. And maybe we do need to let these big businesses die if they can't get up the carbon ladder. Do you, as you again think about the future of ICEMAN, potentially imagine it being used as a tool to identify companies that literally need to be removed from the market because they are not good players?
Yeah, that'll eventually happen too. And that's really the power of it, actually, because it's going back to who really has that power, and that's the consumer, right? So it's really, the consumer, this is not something that's complicated that, it would take much to educate the consumer at all, right? So, right. But I do believe the consumer does hold a lot of power in their hands and what they choose to buy. And we see that so much, and we even see it on the negative side of it today with cancel culture and everything like that. We see how much even politics can play a part in literally destroying companies, right, and their reputations. So that's important. Companies' reputations are important. Profits are important, and corporate image becomes important. And all of these factors, if we can tie that all into reducing the carbon footprint, there's huge forces in effect right there.
We completely agree that the citizen consumer is the lever that we need to address in order to change all this, because as long as we don't make those choices available, they are not going to be able to change their own lifestyle. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Frank. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it too.
We've been speaking with Frank Dalene. He is the author of the new book, Decarbonize the World, also the CEO of Telemark Incorporated, a construction business that was a very early participant in green construction and the development of the LEED standards. The idea of using markets is both a very practical one and a very controversial one. And we want to talk to everybody about potential solutions to this problem. And the answer ultimately is going to be a hybrid, just like nature is full of hybrid solutions to problems of living. The problem of human survival is going to be a hybrid of a lot of different answers. I used the phrase earlier in the conversation that this might be a silver bullet. It's one tool that we need to consider. And it's been a pleasure to talk with Frank about it because he's learned so much from doing the green construction industry from the very beginning. Folks, I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast and all the other ones that we've done with your friends, family, people that you work with, people that you stop on the street. Let's get more ideas out there so that there is less waste. And ultimately, we might restore this planet. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. Folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.